If it's a bad
At least you actually get a little bit.
guy. I know it.
Don't you feel honored?
Okay, let's get started. So, David, did you get to choir on time? No choir today. Well, then you.
So you're in trouble.
Yeah. Thank you for coming today. We appreciate that. It's good to see you here on this beautiful day. Let me just tell you a quick announcement. Mike has brought a bunch of calendars over here. They're right behind Patty. If anybody needs a physical calendar, take as many as you want. There's about 20 of them over there. So there's a monthly planner as well. So I brought this up to make sure I remembered it. Thank you for bringing those, Mike. We have a card to go around. Carrie has been out since, for almost 6 weeks or more than 6 weeks. So Carrie Donaldson is still having a lot of nerve pain. So there's a card to go around on that one. Just a note for you don't see Robert here, he's doing fine, but one of his friends is getting recognized at the church, and he went to see, he and Dale took him, so that's why they're out today. We have a bunch out traveling. We've got one in China, one in Taiwan. And so we've got a bunch of travelers that are here. I'll send around the prayer book as well. Laura and I went to my 50th high school reunion last night, and boy, there were a bunch of old people there. That is yeah, it's amazing. So it was amazing. It was 71 of our group out of 400 and some were dead. I couldn't believe it. And the Vietnam War had a bunch just as that. But at any rate, that was sobering in that respect. Let's go through some of these. If you haven't been to a home meeting, you may be out of luck. Are they done now?
Tonight's full, but.
We were to go to Vicky's, but Vicky's was out of power. So we went to another place with Vicky, but that was really
We
good.
still
We
had
enjoyed
fun, didn't we?
it. It was a lot of fun. It was very much fun.
Drinks were good.
It was good.
Don't ask me for the recipe.
No, that was good. Okay, so let's see here. What else do we have here that we want to go through? Okay, Wilshire on the Go. There's another one Tuesday, October 29th at Ascension Coffee on Dallas Parkway. I guess it's in Addison, I think. Is that where it is? Near Spring Valley and Tollway. It looks like it's about Addison. Let's see what else. Blood Drive is happening next Sunday, November 3rd. I can't believe November 3rd is next Sunday. But we've got that going on. Wilshire Food Baskets. If we want to do this as a group, we need to kind of figure out what we want to do. And we're going to tap Ken Adams again to help us with that as we do. We want to do that. The other thing I want to ask you about is a Sunday school party. Last several years, we've been meeting in James Gallery on Saturday morning and making cookies to give to Austin, shelter, the homeless shelter. If we want to do that again, I need to register that. If that works for you, we'll use Kay's fancy recipe to dry icing fast, so we can get them wrapped up and go. But if that works, we'll do one. We'll pick a date early in December so that people can do other things as well, and we'll try that again. But that's been a fun time. So if that's something we want to do, if you don't want to do it, let's do something. If you want to do something else, let us know that too. So we'll go from there. Okay, so we also, I think, Barbara, you've got one. If you want to do just on your own, you can do a Thanksgiving basket. So we can get one of these that are in. Are they on the narthex? Or they are?
They're in the upper atrium of I guess both north and south.
Okay, so there's another alternative for Thanksgiving food. Okay, Faith in 3D is happening in March, and they're looking for people. There is a Thursday noon brown bag book club that happens. Wow's doing a Tuesday evening book club, a lot of book clubs. Oh, the Thanksgiving luncheon is going to be Sunday, November 24th. Get that luncheon, not evening, luncheon. So you stay at church, have your meal, and then you can go home.
And Dennis, we may want to sit as a class.
Oh, yes,
that
yes.
may be something you want to consider.
Well,
I
if we
think
do, we need
Robert
to,
brought
let's see.
that up.
Yeah, the cost is $10 per adult, and so, anyway, if we want to do that, we can get tickets for that if you want to do that. Anything else that I'm missing here? Oh yes, I do see 3 more of these generation meetings.
Those of you that weren't in the early service, you really got a treat for you for going to the late
Yes.
service.
That was
Yeah.
great.
He
Really?
is a marvelous pastor.
Uh-huh.
Well, just Alan is speaking to it?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah,
who
he is
was
good.
or anything.
I remembered his name from one of the capital campaigns or whatever we did.
Yes.
And he lives, is that in the thing that he lives in Florida and Dallas? Do you know any?
Well, I just know that he's with this company that helps churches raise money, and he does a great job at it.
He's also one time pastor of Park City.
Yes, for a long time. Yeah,
So he's not a newcomer to the pulpit.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yes.
Have you talked to Bert and
Yes.
Diana in the
Yeah.
last day or two?
No, not in the last day or two.
Okay, I haven't either, but I talked to them along the way, and, their condo was destroyed, and I couldn't get food to them because I had food, had a lot of food. It's a long story. Anyway, left over from the
Yes.
thing that we had, but anyway, they just were so busy trying to get after school, getting stuff.
Yes.
They did have insurance on that place.
Yes,
didn't
yes,
they?
I believe so. And they lived in a condo, and but it just destroyed the condo. They were given like 30 minutes to go back in the next day to get stuff. And just, what do you get in 30 minutes, so.
He got
it's-
his instrument.
His trumpets.
Yes, yes, gotta have that, that's how he makes his living. So, anyway, that was a shocker. So
Trumpet, he's a trumpet teacher.
He's a trumpet.
Yes.
so their name is on the prayer list as well. Let's start this off. We're
They're-
glad to have Robert and Bonnie back after their long travels.
It was on his.
And,
Okay, good.
Is there anything else we need to say before we turn it over to David? I want David to give you a couple of minutes. David is become a friend of mine and here at Wilshire. And I just found out that he was teaching in other classes, and I said, wait a minute, he can do that.
Yeah. You bet.
So, anyway, so we are so happy to have David on this one, but David's from Longview and joined the church, a couple of years ago?
2 years.
2 years ago. And give us about 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever you need, background, then we'll get going, David.
All right, thank you. All right, quick background. It said I am from Longview, however, I was born in Gilmer, a small town about 20 miles from Longview, where my grandparents lived. At that time, my father was going to leave the oil field service business because he got tired of them moving him around, and he missed East Texas. So he actually bought a farm right next to my grandfather's. Well, that was before they knew about me. And so when I was born, I already had my 2 older sisters. I think he decided there's no way I'm going to send 3 kids to college as a farmer. And so he went back into oil business. So we moved Longview, Shreveport, Longview, and grew up there after that. After high school, well, my first memory of church is First Baptist Church in Longview. Dr. Morris Ford was the pastor. And at that time, my mother, I had a bird haircut, and my mother said, you can grow it long when you're able to care for it yourself. So I had it till like 6th grade or something. When we would leave church, Dr. Ford would rub my head as I left. And then we were part of a group, my family was part of a group that went to form a mission called Oakland Heights Baptist Church in Longview. Then after high school, I went to Baylor. I was a pre-med major, got no offers for med school, so I had been in not only a cappella choir at Baylor, but also Baylor Religious Hour choir, which I understand there's still a BRH choir, but they don't have a Baylor Religious Hour anymore. So I don't know why.
They've taken religion completely out of Baylor.
Yeah, maybe. And maybe they're encouraging them on Wednesday nights to go to their churches, right? Yeah. So some of my friends said, well, what have you thought about seminary? So, okay. So in 1974, I started seminary and finished there in 77, which is 2 years before George started. And this is why I'm really in favor of the pastoral program that we have, the resident program. seminaries don't provide you outplacement services, or at least they didn't then, or anything. My uncle was a member of Park Cities, and he arranged for me to have a little interview with, I think it was Don Dindy, there, just to have the experience. I didn't have any openings or anything, just to have the experience. So that was in December of '77, and in July of '78, my first son was born. So we had to find some place at the end of '77 to, provide. My mother said, I know somebody in the workforce, Texas Workforce Commission. She says there's a job out here at this power plant by Longview. So I went there, worked in a lab, worked mainly in the environmental department there. And in '84, we moved to Dallas, to the corporate office here in Dallas. And I'll tell you, we went to Park Cities first because I had 3 cousins that went there. Never saw them, so we decided we wouldn't. And my 2 East Texas boys thought the kids were a little stuck up, so we
I don't
went.
know whatever gave him that.
So we went to First Baptist Church. Somewhere along the way, we never really got involved in Sunday school or anything in First Baptist Richardson, so somewhere along the way, my wife was raised in a fundamental church. And I think she saw the way the Baptist church was moving, the Southern Baptist, and I think she probably saw that this is not what I wanted, so she quit going. She told me the pews hurt her back, but I don't think that would, yeah. And so for a while I went by myself, got tired of that, and so I quit. Kind of fast forward, in April of 2014, she was diagnosed with leukemia. Went in remission, had an infection, had a lot of antibiotics, and in May of 2016, she passed away. So, it took me about a year to get over that and kind of figure out, okay, I need to be doing some, well, 6 months later, my company said, we can't afford to pay you anymore. So, yeah, you lose a spouse, you lose a job, and then you're kind of, okay, what do I do now? So that's why it was October of 2017 that I actually joined. I started coming around April visiting, and I told somebody, had I walked in and I saw screens at front of it, I would have turned around and walked out. But I love the form of worship and everything about worship. And so here I am. I found out about the pastoral program in Coffee with George, and John Jay was visiting and was talking about it, and I was thinking back and I said, well, that would have been nice to have. And so George knew, and I don't know whether he told Jessica Capps or somewhere she called me and said, I understand you have a seminary degree. Yeah, it's kind of old, but okay. So she actually got me started doing some substitute teaching, mostly in the open Bible class. And so since then I've been doing substitute teaching. Not too long. Then Dennis told me about the sign-up genius, and so I looked, there were only 3 lessons left this year. And so I looked at them and went, oh, I think I have something on one of those. So I went over to my shelf, and I have this book by G. Campbell Morgan called The Triumphs of Faith, which is about Hebrews chapter 11. So, well, I'll do this one. Not that it's, not over 50 years old, which I tell you, I have a kid, Mark Wingfield. We were doing a lesson on heaven. He was doing heaven, and he talked about his book that he was using. Was a little old. It was 20 years old, and I kid him, I said, except for a few books I bought recently, my whole religious library is over 40 years old. So But I think people back then had, also had the faith and knowledge. And then I saw Leanna a couple of weeks ago at Wednesday lunch, and I was kidding her about how she was gonna get through 10 chapters in one whack. And I think, there were some notes about, I think she probably went over some of the background on Hebrews, the author, and I know she really would like Priscilla to be the author of this. And the others, you know, Paul was originally thought maybe to write it, but it doesn't quite match his, it said it is some of the best Greek that's in the Bible. So it's somebody that's very versed in the Greek language and also Hebrew. So the others are Barnabas, Apollos, even some thought it might be Clement of Alexandria, who came along later, but he was, I think, knowledgeable of it, but he never claimed that he wrote it. You kind of wonder, why didn't they, like Paul, say, I, Paul, you know, why didn't they claim it? And that's one claim that it might have been Priscilla, because of the woman's name wouldn't have gone over well in that day.
That's what I think, is the lack of ego. I mean,
Yeah.
Paul was pretty egotistical.
Yeah.
Right down to
Yeah. Yeah. So, it was, and as George mentioned on Wednesday after his sermon, oh, by the way, there's 2 sermons he's preached on this chapter, so I encourage you to go back and look at those. Faith Forward and Faith Fortitude, both from these chapters we're looking at. But he said, if you look at the back, all of those books that they're in the back, you know why they're there? They were some of the last accepted into the canon of the Bible. This one, as late as 170, apparently was not in the canon of the Bible. So it was later on that it was actually accepted as part of the Bible. And we're glad it is. I would just say that this lesson seems to fit exactly or perfectly for this class in Foundations of Faith. Part of those foundations is the faith of the people that were in the Old Testament. We're going to talk a little about those. Outside of our religious and Christian language, how do we use the word faith? Do you ever use that, just talking to anybody or about anybody?
Well, George Michael had an musical album called Faith.
Yeah.
So, there you go. He was throwing around quite a bit.
I think we use it in very similar ways where someone tells us they'll do something and we have faith that they're going to do that.
I don't know if you have faith, you have confidence.
And confidence,
I was thinking
not always
trust.
exactly the same thing.
I was thinking trust.
Yeah,
You know,
and trust.
kind of fits together.
Okay, and that will be the start of chapter 11 where there's actually a definition.
Isn't our money backed by the full faith and whatever, or the government or whatever, isn't?
Full faith and credit.
What is the word?
Full faith and
Full
credit.
Yes.
Yeah. So, we're actually going to start back in chapter 10, and I'd ask somebody to read Hebrews 10, 19 through 25. Anybody want to?
Therefore, my friends, since we have confidence to enter the sanctuary by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh. And since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us approach with a true heart and full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching.
All right, thank you. William Barclay gives us this little section of the title, The Meaning of Christ for Us. And N.T. Wright, anybody know Tom Wright's writings? He's also a former bishop, I guess, in the Anglican Church. Calls it, So, Come and Worship. I think it was one of my seminary professors that said, when a paragraph starts with therefore, look to see what it's there for. It always is looking back to what it was just talking about. Some of the translations will say so or sent, so it doesn't work too well with those. But the NRSV says therefore. The writer's been building this theological case in the chapters that y'all talked about last time. So he was building this theological case for Jesus as the true king, the true and high priest, the only true sacrifice. But starting with verse 19, he goes from preaching to meddling. So, this is about what difference does it make to those Hebrews that he's writing, and how do we apply this to our lives? So we can have confidence to enter into worship because of the blood or sacrifice of Jesus that opened the direct access to God. This is a veiled, no pun intended, reference to the rending of the curtain that enclosed the Holy of Holies. So in the Jewish faith, the temple, you had the court for the women and the lepers and then the men, and then kind of the outer sanctum, and then the Holy of Holies where the Ark of the Covenant was. And the high priest only went in there once a year, I think, to sacrifice there. So he's sort of talking about, and you remember when Christ died on the cross, that veil, that curtain was rent from top to bottom, which symbolizes, that time that was the point where heaven and the earth came together. That's where God, the direct access to God was. And with the death of Christ, we now have access to God through Jesus.
We don't, it's like you were saying, it was a symbolic situation whereby the curtain was rent in twain, therefore separated, destroyed, if you will.
Right.
And now Jesus has taken up that mantle.
Right. And it mentions here that his flesh is at that place. I think it was Tom Wright who has an example here about God. Jesus is the high priest. He not only introduces us, but he only shows us the way, but he introduces us to God. He said it's someone could tell a visitor how to get to Buckingham Palace, but not many have the authority or the right to introduce the person to the Queen. But Jesus is both. So I thought that was a nice example. So we can approach with a true heart in the full assurance of faith. So the next sentence also kind of reflects this priestly ritual that we were talking about, where holy things were cleansed by the sprinkling with blood of the sacrifices, and then the high priest again and again bathed and cleansed himself in a laver of clear water. So our hearts are sprinkled with Jesus' blood, and we're washed. I think this is a reference to baptism. It says by pure water. So the next sentence hints at the problem that the writer is addressing. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. Remember what I'm sure Leanne talked about. The issue was that this writer is addressing. The primary issue is this group of believers. It's thought that they were probably Jewish Christians, just because of all the history that he gives in this lesson, they would have to be familiar sort of with what that was, although I guess some of the Gentile Christians could be aware of that. But the problem was that they were at least beginning another period of persecution. I don't know whether it was from the Jewish people or the Romans. He talks something about, and we'll talk about this a little later, that they had already gone through some kind of persecution. Remember how you did all this, and so that has a little bit to do with some people, the way some people date this letter. We don't even know when it was exactly when it was written. But if there was a previous persecution, there were two kind of Roman persecutions. Nero, about the year 65, which was actually prior to the Jewish temple being destroyed in 70. But then Domitian had another one about 84. And so it's thought that this occurs somewhere in between those two. It's interesting that, though, that it doesn't mention anything about the temple being destroyed, so it could be even before that. Let's see. And then we talked to, it seems that we are here this morning to provoke one another. Interesting word.
That was it.
Provoke one another.
Well, that's all we need. No provoking.
Wait. This means we're to stir one another up to love and to do good deeds.
Yeah.
Maybe it's thought-provoking. Maybe it's thought-provoking.
Very much so.
That fits right in with the preacher.
I wish it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what he was doing.
And then he goes into personal time with God in prayer and study and just worshiping is important. But so is time spent in the congregation or in the corporal view. We need to spend time, according to the Bible, worshiping together and encouraging one another. There's something about the day of the Lord here mentioned. The early church really believed before the end of their lifetime that Jesus was going to come back. I think that's probably why they all just gave up everything and formed churches, and eventually, I guess over time, okay, it's not now, but sometime in the
They realized it was wishful thinking.
Yeah. Okay, any questions about that little section? Would someone read Hebrews 10:26 through 31?
For if we willfully persist in sin after having received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful prospect of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries. Anyone who has violated the law of Moses dies without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much worse punishment do you think will be deserved by those who have spurned the Son of God, profaned the blood of the covenant by which they were sanctified, and outraged the Spirit of grace? For we know the one who said, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God.
Well, I wonder if that last sentence is where the sermon, "Sinners in the hands of an angry God," came from.
Right.
I don't know. In first reading, this passage really troubled me. Whatever happened to once saved, always saved? Which was, if you were raised in the Southern Baptist Church, that was the say. What do you think the writer means by willfully persist in sin here?
You don't change your ways. You stay in that sinful nature and don't try to get out of it.
And, you know, when you ask for forgiveness, you're, sincerely, you are to turn from that sin, and if you don't, then you assume, or maybe God assumes that your prayer is not sincere. But also, like in an addiction, for example, that would be a case where someone really, it's a lot more difficult to turn away from that, you know? I didn't think about that till I started to say it, but in that instance, it's, you know, you have to ask over and over and over for forgiveness.
At some point in time, you have got to mean it. And by meaning it, I mean you have to turn away from it.
Right, right.
Otherwise, God will turn his back on you.
And there's this little reference here to the Jewish laws and everything. The sin offering that was part of the Jewish faith was specifically to cover sins committed either ignorantly or unwillingly. It was not for sins that were intentionally committed. And
Well, then, you're, in other words, you're speaking of sins of omission rather than commission.
right, well, you either didn't know that was a law,
Uh-huh.
or
And what would the cop tell you? Ignorance of the law is no
Yeah.
excuse.
yeah. There's a example that I think A.T. Wright or Barclay gives about Paul apparently dressed down the high priest at some point, not
Really?
knowing he
Paul
was the
would
high
do that?
priest. Not knowing he was the high priest, and so he kind of had to
Knowing Paul, I don't think
Repent.
he cares.
repent about that. But and also on the ignorance, I noticed N.T. Wright was talking about he was in Canada one time and he pulled up. It was a narrow road and he apparently pulled up on the we would say probably over the curb onto the sidewalk, because apparently in England if it's narrow you do go up on the pathway so that cars can get through. Well, apparently that's illegal in Canada. So he was able to talk the policeman out of the fine because he didn't know it was the law, being a stranger. But these, where there was, you couldn't have just one witness, but if there were 2 or 3 witnesses, it says, in the Jewish faith, then if you committed a sin that was, you knew it was a sin, you did it anyway, then you were essentially cut off from the people, which means you were killed, basically. It was death. Death was the penalty. Pretty tough times.
Well, David, I would think an unwilling part might be like a slave, someone enslaved, especially like, you know, concubines or something like that, that's selected, and they have no choice in their, say, adultery, we would call
Right,
it, and then,
right.
you know, they really have no option.
Mhm.
It's that or death,
Mhm,
I guess,
mhm.
so.
Well, whatever this passage means, it kind of encourages me to kind of evaluate my faith. So, that's good.
It does say, how much more do you think will be deserved by those who have spurned the Son of God?
Right.
It doesn't say, it doesn't take away the possibility that mercy is granted.
Right.
It's a deserved thing, and
Right.
I doubt that many of us labor under the delusion that we deserve what we have coming through Christ's grace to us.
Right.
I don't deserve it.
Right. Exactly.
Well, the things that we do, you get people who are criticizing the people of the past for things that they were brought up to believe were good or not bad, and probably there'll be people that will criticize us for things that are taught today.
Mm-hmm.
And very often they're, you know, just who's wrong, but none of us have the full truth.
Exactly.
And I think that's kind of what it's talking about.
Okay, well, we better move on. Hebrews 10:32 through 39. Can someone read that?
But recall those earlier days when, after you have been enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to abuse and persecution, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion for those who were in prison, and you cheerfully accepted the plundering of your possessions, knowing that you yourselves possess something better and more lasting. Do not therefore abandon that confidence of yours. It brings a great reward. For you need endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. For yet in a very little while, the one who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. My soul takes no pleasure in anyone who shrinks back. But we are not among those who think back and are lost, but among those who have faith and so are saved.
Okay. This is the section where it appears that they had been through persecution before. He reminds them they endured that and even cheerfully accepted the plundering of their possessions. So there is something that has happened to this group previously that he is reminding them that they did persevere during that time.
That cheerfully is a hard word to
Yeah,
really
cheerfully
get.
is kind of
It
hard
really
to say.
is,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Yet cheerfully accepted the plundering of your possessions.
Yeah, I think he then goes on to say that because you knew that you had
Messed up.
better things coming.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, good luck with that.
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants something like enjoy the plundering of their,
Yeah.
you know.
Right. Well, he says,
Really, oh,
Yeah.
gosh.
he says here they need to have endurance. Kind of reminds me of Paul's running the race. You have to have endurance. And then he quotes from this little tiny book of the Minor Prophets. Anybody remembers Bible sword drills in their little? And the best thing you could do was to memorize the books in order so that you know at least kind of what part of the Bible to open up. Well, this 3 chapters of Habakkuk fall between Nahum and Zephaniah. Did that help anybody?
Sure.
You lost me at Habakkuk.
I'm looking up there.
But I would kind of like to read a little bit bigger section, and you'll see where this comes from. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision. Make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith. And that last phrase is used several times in the New Testament, that the righteous shall live by their faith. This was a time, in fact, he talks about the Chaldeans, which I think are Babylonians or Neo-Babylonians, so we're talking about 7th to 6th, 7th century BC somewhere, and Habakkuk is concerned that God is using the Chaldeans to punish the Jewish people because the Chaldeans are really bad. So how can you use these bad people to punish? And he's telling them just wait. God did just
So the Chaldeans from some place called Chaldea?
probably, yeah,
Because it's not on the map.
yeah.
Slash Chaldea.
Okay. Finally, we get to Hebrews 11, which is really the this is where the examples start. Right after this first section. it's called, this is faith defined. Somebody read Hebrews 11, 1 through 3.
Now faith, oh,
No, go ahead.
no, sorry, you go ahead, let her rip.
Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith our ancestors received approval. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from the things that are not visible.
Thank you. So according to G. Campbell Morgan in my book, Triumphs of Faith, this is the only definition of faith to be found in the Bible. It's kind of an abstract definition, but it is a definition. The authorized version, which is the King James, says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The Revised Version, not the New Revised, says faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the proving of things not seen. So the Greek word that's translated substance or assurance is hypostasis. And it's the simple word confidence. Somebody mentioned that earlier, about confidence. So faith is the confidence of things hoped for. And then the second half of that, we say seeing is believing, but this seems to say something different. It says that believing or faith is being sure without seeing. Evidence or proving could also be called conviction. And G. Campbell Morgan thinks that, or he believes that the writer is proceeding from effect to cause, so that it's the conviction of things not seen is the confidence in things hoped for. So that takes a little thinking. And when the preacher, sometimes the writer here is called, not in here, but the preacher, because he appears to be, this is like a sermon to these people. So it's sort of a pastoral thing. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God. The visible and not visible part is kind of confusing. Did God make the cosmos out of something that was invisible? I really don't think so. I think what he's saying here is that God spoke the world into being out of nothing. Anybody have any thoughts about the definition here?
It strikes me that, as a community, scientists, there's a large influence of atheism in the scientific community, among physicists and that kind of thing. I read this and I see a total harmony between how physics almost universally envisions the creation of the cosmos and how the Bible indicates that God spoke it into being from nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was kind of wondering, okay, when he's talking about invisible, is that dark matter? What is that? Yeah, and it's funny because, yeah, G. Campbell Morgan's books were written years and years ago. There's a place in there where he talks about you can't prove who your mother is. You can show the birth certificate, but that doesn't prove anything. Well, he didn't have DNA evidence back then, and so yes, you can.
Well, even that's an article of faith to some extent.
Yes.
All the science is, for that
Right.
matter.
Well, I think of the invisible as atoms to molecules,
Mhm.
you know, to bigger things, you know, to organisms. But I taught science, you know, for a lot of years, and biology basically, and I had always had a little segment on chemistry. But you know, one of the laws of chemistry is that matter can neither be created nor destroyed. So I had a lot of opportunities through the years, and I was free to do that in my school, you know, to say those kinds of things, that God created the atoms and the, you know, and the elements, and then he formed everything from that.
Mhm.
And you can't destroy it. Now, there have been new elements discovered or
Oh, yeah.
formed in the last few years, so that kind of blows my theory a little bit.
Right.
So.
And some that only last milliseconds of life, so.
Sure, yeah.
Someone read Hebrews 11:4-7.
By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain's. Through this, he received approval as righteous, God himself giving approval of his gifts. He died, but through his faith he still speaks. By faith, Enoch was taken so that he did not experience death, and he was not found because God had taken him. For it was attested before he was taken away that he had pleased God. And without faith it is impossible to please God, for whoever would approach him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith, Noah, warned by God about events as yet unseen, respected the warning and built an ark to save his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir to the righteousness that is in accordance with faith.
Finally, we're to the examples, and we got 10 minutes left, so we'll move along pretty fast. One thing about all these characters that are mentioned here that kind of encourages me is they weren't always faithful. And definitely weren't perfect. I think Abram tried to pass off his wife as his sister a couple of times. Jacob was, even the name I think is trickster. Moses struck the rock instead of just touching the rock, and therefore he didn't get to go into the promised land. So all this gives me a little hope. So,
Well, it's nice to see that some of these people are presented as human beings.
yes.
And not merely as angels or something
Right.
of that nature, you know.
Why was Abel's offering greater or more acceptable sacrifice than Cain's? You know what that might be?
There always has to be blood for a sacrifice.
That is one
Fruit and
issue.
vegetables.
No.
Can't
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Right.
And I think your attitude always, I mean, looking at present day and us, you know, if your attitude's wrong, just hang on to it because you're not giving it out of love.
Yeah.
So you need to really give it up. Just give it up, let it go when you're giving.
And apparently, Abel gave of his best of his flock, and Cain just brought some of his harvest. And I think that Cain's reaction to what, I mean, after God accepted it, also tells us something about Cain. How do you kill your brother? And then it says that Abel still speaks. How is that? I think that's why we're here today. We're seeing that Abel, his faith, that he gave of his best and trusted God, that makes him still speak. Does anyone have a relative named Enoch?
Hope not.
My mother told me that her grandfather's name was Enoch Franklin Pierce Murphy. It's the only person I've ever known with the name Enoch. And you'll remember George talked about this. Enoch began to walk with God after the birth of Methuselah. So was there something about that event that changed him? I mean, he was 65 years old and lived 300 more years. But it didn't really say that he didn't walk beforehand, but it does mention that he walked with God after the birth of Methuselah. So I don't know whether something about that made him start thinking about life and going on. But Genesis 5:24 says, Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him. G. Campbell Morgan suggests that walking with God means that he moved in the divine direction. He was in agreement with God, that there was mutual trust, and that he kept in step with God. That is, he didn't get ahead of God, and he didn't get behind God.
Now that's hard to live up to.
Yes. And according to this, it says he pleased God, and I don't know that you can have a better thing said about you than that. Then Noah. We all know about Noah. Boy, it had to have a lot of faith to put all the time and effort and resources into building an ark when everybody around him was going, "What are you, fool? What are you doing?"
Well, it was sure to see who had God with them and who had God without them,
Yeah.
or without God.
So he was convinced that it was someday, what God said, it was going to start raining. He was confident that he and his family would survive if he did what God told him. So there's that confidence in the faith in God. Somebody read Hebrews 11:8-12.
By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he set out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he stayed for a long time in the land he had been promised, as in a foreign land, living in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, he received power of procreation, even though he was too old. And Sarah herself was barren, because he considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one person, and this one as good as dead, descendants were born, as many as the stars of heaven, and as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore.
Okay, Abraham set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, but he set out, he didn't know where he was going. If you look, this map up here, he started down there and he kind of followed the river and down and came in to what we would call the promised land. But he was always a traveler, a foreigner, and so was his son and grandson. And all that he did by faith. So he looked forward to things unseen, to a city that has a foundation, whose architect and builder was God. So I'm not sure. It appears that he might be looking beyond Jerusalem to a heavenly city. But we know then the story. They were both about 90 years old when the three strangers came and talked to them. And what was their first reaction?
Laughter.
Laughing. So, but eventually he developed the faith that he would have a son. We're about out of time, so let me run through this. We know about Abraham having the faith. Even though God had said his inheritance was going to come through Isaac, he took him to sacrifice him, believing that maybe God would raise him from the dead, because he still believed that his family was going to go through that. And we know how his faith worked there.
You know, as a parent, that's one of the hardest things for me to grasp that Abraham could really do that. I mean, that he could go ahead, keep moving in that direction, knowing that he was gonna kill his son. And that would be,
That's hard to
I
imagine.
can't even imagine saying, no, God, I'm not gonna do that. I do a lot of things, but I'm not doing that. I mean, that's just your normal reaction, I think, as a parent.
And it says that he received him back. Well, that must mean that he had already given him up. He'd already, I guess, got comfortable, not comfortable with it, but
Mentally,
knew he would do
yeah.
that.
David, we probably won't get to it, but my favorite verse was 31 on there that, about Rahab.
Oh, yeah. So we've got all the stories of Abraham, and then it kind of goes through the patriarchs, and it's interesting that in Isaac, you've got the story that Esau was actually the older brother and should have got the inheritance, but God had other plans, and even let Jacob kind of fool his dad about that in order to get the blessing. Happens again in Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. The right hand was supposed to be on the older son, and the left hand on the younger son when they get the blessing. But he crossed his arms. So once again, the younger son got the blessing and not the older. All in God's, and Ephraim's tribe prevailed, and Manasseh's didn't do so well. And then we've got all the way down to Moses, and all the story of Moses and the things that he did. The story of the Israelites having confidence they could walk around 7 times and blow a horn and something was going to happen. I'm sure they didn't know what, but surprise, surprise, the walls fell down. But Rahab survived that because she kept the spies that were sent in and had the faith. Somehow, I guess she had heard about the Red Sea and all the things these people were doing, thought, maybe their God is the one I need to follow. So somehow, as a pagan, she had faith in God. The next ones are all about the judges. You've got Gideon. You have Barak. Anybody remember Barak? He defeated that army.
Wasn't he president? You're quiet.
Samson, we do remember Samson. Jephthah. All those were judges. Then we have one king, King David mentioned. Samuel, the prophet. And then the very last 2 verses kind of wrap this up. Says, yet all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. So, better is a word that this author likes to use. Also, perfection is another word that he likes to use, but they were looking forward, and this is a reference to Christ. Well, thank you. I knew this would be a challenge to get through.
What does that mean in your interpretation, where it says God had provided something better so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect?
I don't know if he's talking about...
Are they saying we, like they, would be made perfect through God, or?
It's looking forward to Christ and his sacrifice. And I'm not sure how to interpret that as far as, does this mean their faith? I assume when God's kingdom comes, they're going to be there. But you couldn't have that faith and that system bring that kingdom. It had to be Jesus that brought that. So I guess it was kind of looking forward to that.
Thank you, David,
All right.
appreciate that very much. Okay, let's go through our prayer requests.